You're listening to the Wired for Impact podcast.
All right, I'm here with Brett Pike. How are you doing, brother?
Hey, doing good. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. You've got some really interesting stuff going on with your homeschooling venture that you've started, and you're not just doing it for your own family. You've really started off a whole thing here. And I came across your stuff online, and we had a conversation, and I'm excited to hear more about the curriculum that you've developed. It's very, shall we say, unconventional, which I think is healthy and what we're needing in today's world. Because I keep telling my kids, the world you're going to graduate into is the school that we have right now. The traditional school is really not preparing our kids for the world that they're going to be graduating into, in my humble opinion. But first and foremost, thanks for taking the time today, and welcome to the call.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I came through the system and I did everything I was supposed to do. And, you go to college, you get the degree, you work hard. I graduated my master's program, 4.0 GPA, blah, blah, blah. And you get out of that and you say, wait a second, I don't feel like I really know anything. I don't feel like I have any particular set of skills that is really special or unique or anything like that, just a cog in the machine. And then you start to look more into the world and why that is. And to me, after going through all that, seeing the school system, I knew I wasn't going to send my children to that. And then I was like, man, do I really want to be a teacher in this system for the next 35 years? That sounds just dreadful to me. And I went my own way, and, God willing, things have worked out, and we're building something really special now. So this is the change we need.
It's very exciting, man. So where did you go to school and what did you study?
Yeah, I got my bachelor's degree from Cortland University in upstate New York in adolescent history education. And I got my master's from Queens College in birth to two special education. So I was all about education. I knew I wanted to make a difference in that system. But then when you get into it and you see what it's all about and the bureaucracy and everything that goes along with it, you realize the best way to change the system is to just tear it down from the grassroots level, tear it down from its base and build something up, something original. And that's what we're doing.
So were you in the quote unquote system at all? Were you a teacher in the traditional sense, or did you go straight to this? Give us a little bit of a history from when you graduated to what led you to what you're doing now.
Yeah, I graduated. I did my student teaching when I had a variety of different classrooms. And then I started working as a teacher in the 0 to 3 level. And I did that for about 8 years. But within that time, you see really how all that bureaucracy works, really at every level, from the high school, where I spent a little bit of time at, to the lower levels with the little children. Everything's really dominated by bureaucracy and paperwork. And this is how you have to do things. And it's kind of like there's a ship driving and no one's at the wheel. And that's why it's producing these children who are 18 years old and they don't really know how to do anything.
Can you give some examples of that? Like what kind of bureaucracy are you talking about? And what, I mean, the average person who would be an advocate for, who still thinks that the current education system is producing intelligent kids. I mean, some kids are graduating with a lot of education, 4.0s and stuff like that. What do you mean that they don't know anything? Give us a little perspective.
Yeah, well,
what you mean by
the teachers can't deviate from the norm or deviate from the textbook because they're subservient to, one, the political environment within the schools, which are the certain things that you can't teach, you can't say, and two, they're subservient to the paperwork, which is the standardized testing. So they have to teach to those tests, and if the students get good grades on those tests, that's great because that leads to things like people getting promotions, to the funding coming in, to everything that goes along with that. Whereas if they don't do good on those tests, right, there are repercussions from that sense, right? I mean, everything from even to where the teachers are being observed in this one class a semester. And if that observation isn't up to par with what the bureaucracy wants, then that teacher gets into trouble. So everything's just very machine-like, very rote. This is what we're teaching. This is how you do it. And, if you try to deviate from that at all, originality, really prompting the kids to think about the world, then you get smacked on the wrist. Your institution, the school, gets smacked on the wrist. And, one person after another is held accountable for that. And because of that, everyone really It's like the principal is a prisoner, right? And then the assistant principal is a prisoner to the principal, and the teachers are prisoners to that. And it's like the prisoners run the asylum, because you'll find a lot of very good teachers. I mean, I've met many very good, real historians, people who very much are against what's going on in the mainstream, but they feel like when they're in that system, they can't have those conversations with the children. And it's really unfortunate, because they're really wasting a lot of good people and a lot of good talent that are out there.
Yeah, I agree. It's one thing that I've always said about the schooling that my kids have received, and is that it's filled with good people. There's a lot of really good people there with good hearts, and a lot of them are great educators in a lot of sense. But you noted a minute ago that it's almost like it's a ship with no captain. But at the same time, I would almost argue that there is a captain. It's just maybe not, the captain's not in the ship. It's like everything is standards based, which begs the question, well, who's creating the standards? Who is the captain? Who is creating the railways that everybody has to stay within? Do you know who those standards are? Like, where are those standards coming from? Do you know?
It's almost fractal. I mean, in one sense, yes, I know where they're coming from. In that, for example, if you study the history of education, you would get back to something called the Reese Committee in the 1950s. It was a congressional committee, and they were investigating tax-exempt foundations to see if they were involved in what they called un-American activities. And they defined, it's important, like this is a classical education term, right? It's important that we define terms. Well, they defined un-American activities as any means by these tax-exempt foundations of altering the democratic process of the United States of America in a way that wasn't outlined in the Constitution, that it wasn't meant to be that way, right? Subversive means. And anyway, this guy, Norman Dodd, really great guy, lifelong whistleblower. He took on the banks before he did this. Actually took on the banks, which is nice. But Dodd got access to the corporate minutes of the Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. And what he found is dating back to, I mean, he found a lot of things, like dating back to 1910, they were already scheming to get America into what would be World War I, like really nefarious stuff from these tax-exempt foundations, because they're controlled by the bankers, and the bankers had vested interest in that. It's all a conglomerate of mush. But after World War I, these foundations really wanted to make sure, at the time, the agenda changes, but the methods are the same. At the time, they wanted to make sure that America never got back to an anti-war mindset. And of course, now we live in the great empire, right? It's like, it's shameful when you really understand what our country does, how they invade other countries in the Middle East. And I mean, what happens, the human cost of that? Like these children that have lived their entire lives with American fighter jets dropping bombs over their head because of lies, right? To spread democracy, right? Well, they never wanted America to get back to an anti-war mindset. And they determined that the best way they could prevent that from happening was to take over Americans' understanding of history, which is very interesting. It leads me to where I am, the historian, right? So Americans' understanding of history. And at first, they tried to do that by bribing the leading historical authorities, individuals of the day, and they were turned down uniformly. They offered money, turned down. Great, no problem. They set their sights on the university system, and they handpicked 20 students from around the country, and they flew them across the ocean to London. And like the devil, luring Jesus out to the desert and offering him the world, they offered these 20 students the world. But, you know, they weren't Jesus. So they wind up getting $400,000 in grants, which was a tremendous amount of money at the time. We're talking about 1930s, right? And 10 years later, they make up the governing board of the American Historical Association, which at the time, the American Historical Association was in charge of best practices as it relates to the way future history teachers will be trained and best practices as to what goes into history textbooks. And just like that, they took over the way history was taught, the people teaching it and their understanding what's in the textbook, the way it's taught in the United States of America. Now, the agenda changes, but the methods are generally the same. In fact, they did the same thing with the medical system. I could get into that after if you want. But this started with me saying that it's like the ship is driving, but there's no one there, right? There's a boat moving, but there's no one at the helm. There's no captain. Well, what I mean by that is, yeah, you have these bureaucrats at the Department of Education, and you would say, well, the Department of Education is determining, where the funding's going and what these schools are teaching. So the Department of Education is at the helm. But these people at the Department of Education are put into place. These are political hacks. They're bureaucrats who are put into place. They're appointed by the worst hacks of all, the politicians. And through their vetting, they have to go through the vetting, and basically it has to make sure that they're politically correct. So people will look at the schools now and say, oh my God, how could it be possible that they're teaching children very inappropriate messaging? They're teaching children that are in second grade about LGBTQ, QRS, TUV, WX, YZ, when meanwhile, you shouldn't be talking to my children about anything sexual. All right. You're there to educate them. They should be learning reading, writing, arithmetic, carpentry, engineering, right? They shouldn't be talking about sodomy. Okay. It's inappropriate. Everyone knows it's inappropriate. They bully people. They make people feel like they can't say the obvious truth or there'll be repercussions. Well, those repercussions that everyone feels, those bureaucrats, those politically correct hacks, these are the type of people that are most controlled by that outward pressure. So you have this outward societal pressure pushed by institutions, pushed by the outrage mob, and say, oh my God, you're so hateful. How don't you want to teach LGBTQRSTUV to second graders? And then it gets into the curriculum. So yeah, the Department of Education is driving the wheel, but these people they're like autonomous drones. They're NPCs. They're just controlled by the whims of what they're supposed to think. And that's how the system really functions. And the more people see that, that's why I tell them it's really broken from the base level. So yes, it's important that we get into PTA meetings and we try to fix the system. We run for school board presidents. Yes, do that big time. But ultimately what we need to do is say, while that's going on, we can build a parallel system. Like they can do their thing in the public school. I'm not trying to, go do your thing, but we'll build a parallel system and do our thing. And then we'll see what people like more. And I think barring interference, which of course that's always potentially something that could happen, I think it's clear what people will like more.
I do too. And I've always left scratching my head going, we have access now with the internet. We can connect our children to the best, highest, most effective educators that are available anywhere on the planet. Why would we not do that? Why would we not start to leverage the online capabilities that we have and educate in ways? So anyway, this kind of alludes to what you're doing. If you would explain what was the last straw for you and what was the impetus for you to start what you're doing, and then tell us what you're doing.
Well, I'll tell you what. I knew I didn't even have children yet, but I knew I would never send my children to public school when I was in a teacher's lounge. At the time, I was teaching a 12th grade economics class, which falls under the purview of social studies. That's why I was teaching that. Even though at the time, even from my college studies, I had like no background in that. I was like, oh, you want me to teach economics? Sure. And get at it. Now I feel very comfortable doing that, but at the time, which tells you more about the system, right? Like the person you had teaching economics was a 22-year-old that knew nothing about economics, right? And I studied it at the time and did my best. And now I would do a very good job with that. Now I could break down how the Fed works on every level. But at the time, a 22-year-old kid. But anyway, I'm teaching that class, and I had this student, a girl, she's a 12th grader, who really didn't do well in really anything. And I'm teaching 12th grade economics, and this is fairly complicated stuff for the kids. And she was doing wonderful. So we're in a teacher's lounge, and the conversation starts, talking about the kids, and everyone's talking about how terrible she's doing. And, she's not the brightest student. Like, they're saying this out loud. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, you say this out loud, and this was my kid, you'd have a real problem. So they're saying this out loud, and they're making fun of this girl. And then it gets to me, and I say, I think she's very smart. She's doing great. And then we start going over the grades and everything she's doing. And so, well, how are you doing that? And this is what really struck me. I wasn't doing anything particularly special. What I did was I recognized that this girl had no confidence in herself. So all I did was I made little victories feel like she had just climbed a mountain. And I kept things simple, and we just built. Because I'm not going to throw stuff at her that she doesn't get from the start. She's going to shut off and feel dumb. And that was basically my approach. I approached her as an individual, as I've always approached all of my students as. These are individuals. They're on different levels. They're different people. You meet them where they're at, and you challenge them with challenges that they could overcome. You build their self-esteem. And then, for a student that's knows everything right off the bat, the challenges I offer that student might be different, right? The way I approach that student might be different.
Mm-hmm.
And to see that in that moment, and I was a kid, to see that in this moment, I said, wow, I had seen a lot, but this system's really broken. And this culture, this environment is never a place that I want my kids to be. I remember myself growing up. I'd sit back and think, because really, by the time I graduated my master's program, I was a 4.0 student. But growing up, I was always a B student. I was a resource room student. And I remember growing up. By the way, I'm an Amazon #1 bestseller now. I remember growing up. I published 7 books. My teachers telling me that I wasn't a good writer, right? I took that personal, and I was like, man, I think I'm really creative, but they all say I suck.
Mm.
And to see that with that student and to think back in my own experiences, I said, you know what? This is a problem. And this system is hurting children. And that's when I really, along with my awakening to the world, I really started to seek out the minds that had been pointing out the problems with the system. And we could get into that. And anyone who comes across this information, they'll know it the moment they read it. And it will change their life and their children's lives forever.
Let's go a little further with that. What are you talking about? Who are the people that are pointing out the problems? What are they saying?
Yeah, so I started to wake up to the world probably around 2015, 2016. And I'm not saying that I comprehended the world nearly at the level I do now, right? Like if I had a conversation with that guy, I would be very patient and I would feed things to him, but I would think he's very naive. Just as 5 years from now, the version of me would talk to this guy and he'd probably think that I was very naive, right? Because we have to grow as people. And it's crazy to me how we go in society and see all these people who it's like stalled development, delayed development. They just stop. But anyway, I started waking up to the world, and I came across this guy, Richard Grove, through the Tragedy and Hope podcast. And he was a historian, as he calls himself, a forensic historian. Really gets back into the primary documents. I eat that up. So that was my background. That's the one thing, that was my advantage, that I always cared about primary documents. I was always interested in that stuff. So my friend tells me about this guy, Grove, and he shows me a radically different worldview based in history than I had come across. And I was a historian. I graduated with a degree in history. So, I watched that and I was like, yeah, well, this guy Grove's an idiot. And I'm going to prove to you how dumb he is. So he made his claims. And I said, all right, well, let me get back to some documents and I'll show you.
Explain what you mean really quick by primary documents for anybody that doesn't know what you mean by that.
Yeah. So when you study historical events, you want to study the firsthand testimonies of people who lived through those events, because just like the news where something happens and then right after the firsthand account, you just start getting that spin. Well, imagine 200, 300, 350, 400 years of spin, right? Of political agendas, of misinterpretations, of more nefarious agendas, right? So primary documents are firsthand testimonies. They're an account of what happened from someone who was actually there, someone who was actually present. And some of those accounts could be authoritative and some of those accounts could be just regular people. And we see the importance of this all the time. So there's an event that happens, whatever it might be. And then CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and ABC, they get there, and right away the spin happens. And we see that happen almost instantaneously. Well, imagine the spin that we all have to deal with when we're dealing with things that happened 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 300 years ago, right? The founding of this country, right? This is a long time ago. So generations of people misinterpreting historical events, copying what they heard, but it's not quite right, or, more nefarious reasons where people changing history or creating narratives to work to their advantage, kind of like what we talked about earlier with the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and whatnot. So when you study history, you really want to get back to primary documents, and that comes down to firsthand testimonies, people's diaries, court proceedings, documented court proceedings, congressional hearings, and things of that nature, so you can actually get it right from the source rather than generations of people misinterpreting information. Here's an example. One of the things I've been working on lately is we've been doing the Founding Father series, where I pick a founding father of the United States of America, and I basically teach a course around that founding father. And the reason I do that is children have to be connected to their roots, because a nation not connected to its roots, just like a tree with shallow roots, is very easy to knock out of the ground. And that's why they've done such an extraordinary job at detaching Americans from the founding of the United States of America. They're bigots, they're hateful, they're slave owners, all these things. So anyway, I'm studying James Swan. And James Swan is a really interesting founding father. You don't hear much about him, but he was an amazing man. And he took part in the Boston Tea Party. He was a son of liberty, threw the tea right off the ships. He was shot in the Battle of Bunker Hill. He was shot twice. And during the Revolutionary War, he wound up accumulating a fortune, shipping, smuggling goods back and forth between the United States and France. And his fortune would get even larger with the French Revolution and his activities during that. So he wound up being an extraordinarily rich man who actually purchased the debt, that the entire debt that the United States owed to France in 1791 or 1795. James Swan comes in and he buys it, and he bails the United States of America out. That's how committed he was to the cause, and that's how successful he had been. He lived this stuff. He was on that ship, the Boston Tea Party. He shot at Bunker Hill, and he was committed to this country. And he was a real steward of individual liberty, of freedom. And he actually wrote, it's not a book, he wrote maybe a pamphlet, but it's about 41-page letter he wrote to the governor of Massachusetts about the North Atlantic slave trade. And keep in mind, this was a man who had made his wealth not shipping slaves. He didn't take part in that, but he had accumulated his wealth in the shipping industry. So he had a real firsthand knowledge of what this stuff really was. And he wasn't doing this stuff to propagate it. He was writing about what the North Atlantic slave trade is. And he would go on to make an argument about how we are supposed to be men of God, that we have to stand before God one day. And how can we, with good conscience, look God in the eyes and say we have been a part of this abomination of human activity? And he really breaks down in this obscure letter lost in history from the guy in shipping what the slave trade really was. And he approaches it from a few different perspectives. He talks about the horrid situation on the ship and the way these merchants would abuse these slaves to the point where, I mean, really horrid stuff, forced cannibalism, buck breaking, as they call it. You make sure that, who's your baddest man? We're going to break them, and then you'll all know you don't want to be the baddest man, right? That type of thing. All the way to how some of the slaves, although some were treated well, as he pointed out, how in many of these plantations, the treatment of these slaves was inhumane and horrible, the breaking up of families. He talks about all this stuff. Very great man. And one of the other things he talks about is the role that the African nations played in the North Atlantic slave trade, and how these merchants would show up on African shores And they would say, hey, we have all these goods. And these African kings would actually raid other villages. And as James Swan said, this is what we're part of. We go there with our goods, tell them, hey, you want this stuff? Get us some slaves. And they would raid other villages. They would kill thousands of people in other villages. The Africans were doing this. And the people that survived, they would capture and they would bring to the slave ships and trade them for good. And Swan said 3,000 people die just so we can get 300 slaves. And that really gives you a full picture of what the North Atlantic slave trade was from all perspectives, both from the mistakes of the European and from the things you're not supposed to talk about, like what the Africans did was really horrible too. I could even argue possibly worse because although they're rivaling tribes, you're doing that to people on your own continent is a really horrid thing. And through getting back to these documents, you understand, okay, I have a better picture of what the North Atlantic slave trade really was than all of these people who are endlessly virtue signaling about how angry they are about slavery that happened, 170 years ago, so everyone should give up their rights. Meanwhile, I'm looking at these people, I'm like, you going to say anything about what's going on in Libya with the open market slave trades that were enabled by America overthrowing Gaddafi and the bombing of the Middle East? You're going to talk about that? No, you don't care about that. Are you going to talk about those Nike shoes you're wearing or that Apple phone you're on right now, which is made possible by slave labor? Yeah. They don't want to talk about that, right? So by being that forensic historian, as Richard Grove says, you can really start to understand history from a comprehensive level, a forensic level, in which the majority of people go their whole lives virtue signaling their nonsense, and they have no idea what they're actually talking about.
Crazy. I love that example. And that is that one tiny, like you said, that one document, you'd probably learn more about the slave trade and the horrors around it and the people that tried to oppose it. And by that one document, than probably an entire career of education in today's school. So I love that point. You had started to, I interrupt you to tell us a little bit more about primary documents, but you were telling us about some of the people that are standing up and pointing out what the problems were. Can you explain who those people are and what those problems are?
Oh, yeah. So this started with me proving Richard Grove wrong, where, I was going to show how he didn't know anything. And I listened to his claims. I started digging into it. And about 3 days later, I realized that Richard Grove was very smart and I was the idiot. But not that dumb, because I had an open enough mind to realize and little enough of an ego to say, oh, wow, this is great. I wasn't insulted by it. I was like, this guy is amazing. Let me just soak it all in. So I started.
What did you find?
Richard Grove of the Peace Revolution and the Tragedy and Hope podcast. I think you could find him at tragedyandhope.com, which is a reference to a book written by Carol Quigley, Tragedy and Hope, which is, you want to talk about the origins. I don't know the origins, but really track back the impetus behind what people now call the new, look at Carol Quigley.
Like, what was it that he said that you first disbelieved, and then when you looked into it, you found out he was telling the truth?
Oh, God, so long ago now. I really, through his claim, one of the things that he started out were the history of eugenics, how the eugenics wasn't a Nazi movement. They actually borrowed eugenics from the United States, where it had actually started, which is like pretty jarring claims, right? You're like, the United States of America was systematically killing off American citizens based on a variety of different factors, race, intelligence, disability, whatever it might be. That can't be the case. The United States were the good guys. I'm not, by the way, for anyone who lacks critical thinking faculties, I'm not saying that the Nazis were the good guys. I'm pointing out that maybe the Americans weren't the good guys either, that there are very nefarious roots, right? Sometimes there's just all bad guys. In fact, usually there's just multiple bad guys, right?
Right. So, yeah, I've been waking up to a lot of that recently.
So you start digging into this stuff and you look into, I have a book that I could pull out right now that I bought at a thrift shop. I got it about 2 weeks ago, written in very early 1900s, which is called The Science of Eugenics. And I bought it a couple weeks ago. But you start looking into these claims and Margaret Sanger and And by the way, that's where you start getting into Bill Gates. So it would wind up coming back full circle, right? So Richard Grove was pointing this stuff out back in 2015, which is why I knew all about Mr. Philanthropist Bill Gates. And, I started looking into his TED Talks where he's saying, we're going to use vaccines and healthcare to lower the population of the earth by 15%, which when you want to talk about 15% of 7 billion people, these are remarkable claims, right? Remarkable objectives. So I just started looking into these things one by one, and each thing would be true. He did a lot of really good work with the history of the food system and companies like Bayer and Monsanto and how they go back to World War II and Zyklon B and all of the different nefarious things that these companies have been involved in. And just claim by claim, it was proving to be accurate. And from there, I knew that I had a lot of thinking to do. I had a lot of self-reflecting to do. And what separates a conspiracy theorist from a truther, or what separates someone who starts to see the problems in the world with someone who really wakes up, is you start to reevaluate your own cognitive process, your own system of thinking. So when I came across this guy Grove and realized that my previous held beliefs were inaccurate, my inclination wasn't to jump on to what Grove was saying or who else is saying this. They're the ones telling me the truth. My inclination was to reevaluate my own cognitive process and say, how can I make sure my system of thinking is accurate so that this does not happen again? Because what's happening in the public school system is they are teaching children that truth comes from authority, right? So a lot of times, even when people wake up, they will realize that what CNN and Fox News and all of these different institutions are saying are lies, but then they'll just go cling on to the next guy. They'll go cling on to Alex Jones. Well, now everything that he says is true, right? And until you reevaluate your own system of thinking and really figure out how to separate what is true from what is false or what might be, then you're never going to have your feet on firm ground. You're never going to be a true critical thinker who understands the world. And it was that awakening, the development of intellectual self-defense, that really empowered me to be the person I am now. And then I think this all started through my listening to Richard Grove. I started to look into the school system, and I came across minds like John Taylor Gatto, and he really started to break down the problems with the school system.
I love what you said about intellectual self-defense. Taking, frankly, full ownership and responsibility is, I think, at the heart of what you're talking about too, and not just, like you said, clinging on to what somebody else said. And, there's some merit to that. Like, we didn't evolve because we all thought the same independently on our own. Like, there are times where we need to take shortcuts to say, well, I'm not a doctor, so I need to listen to his authority or her authority because I don't have that expertise. So there's some understanding as to why we look to authorities in different places. However, to your point, if you don't have the capability at all or ever to have the intellectual self-defense, then you're just a leech, subject to what anybody and everybody else says. And you're also vulnerable to a real nefarious authority coming in and telling you exactly what you need to do. You ultimately become a slave to it.
Even within that, we have the ability to vet authorities and use our discernment, which so many people are just completely void of doing. So a doctor is a great example, because if I'm not feeling well, I don't want to be doing all of this research, trying to put myself through quick medical school and figure out how to get myself better. I want to have someone that I could count on and say, hey, I'm not feeling good. Something's wrong. Can you help get me better? But who do you go to? If I'm feeling sick and I need a doctor, the first thing I would do is gather their perspective on the relationship between what we eat and put in our body and health. And do they understand the importance of having a healthy diet and having a clean system, and how the food goes in and everything within your body is interconnected, right? If you're having a problem with breathing, right, the doctor might say, oh, well, a Western doctor might say, here, take this heart medication, take this pill, right? But I need to have a doctor that understands how everything in your body is connected as a system, almost like a highway, right? And how if one thing in your body starts to break down, that could then systematically lead to the breakdown of the next thing in your body and the next thing in your body. And then the symptom could manifest in your ability to breathe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I want to do is ascertain, does the doctor understand these basic tenets, and do they put these things into practice in the way that they practice medicine? And if the answer is no, then I know that they're pushing Western-based, petroleum-based medicine that they have probably been brainwashed into in their schooling system. And they're not the doctor for me, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with Western medicine, right? Western medicine will save your life. Western medicine is great. But if you lack an understanding of Eastern medicine and how the body is all interconnected and what you put into the body is important, now I know that you're not a doctor who is going to heal me, right? You're a doctor who's going to put me on pills. And I can use my discernment to say, that's not the person who should be treating me. I'm going to find the doctor who understands nutrition, who understands the interconnectivity of the body as a system. And then they can use their knowledge, which is a lot better than mine, of the Western things and say, you know what, something at this point, maybe it is a good idea to get surgery, or at this point, maybe it is a good idea to take a pill, right? Which to me is a last resort. But I have to know that they have the knowledge to do that. And I can use my discernment to ascertain, is this that guy, or is this someone I don't want to listen to?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So we've been talking a lot about the problems with education. What ultimately, walk us through what solution you came up with, and tell us the website address and what you're doing now to help create this parallel educational solution.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I started the Classical Learner Homeschooling Company, which I didn't know what it was going to be at the time. And I created the company, and I basically just put myself out there that I could help people set up their homeschools, because I had a background in education. I was an educator, and with my unique skill set and worldview, I thought I could help people in that regard. And I was pleasantly surprised to find out that a lot of people wanted to work with me. And I was working one-on-one with families and setting up their homeschools. This is how I would educate your child if they were my child. These are the things I would focus on. These are the resources I would use. This is the approach I would take. And that was year one. And it was great. But after year one, I was like, all right, there's a market for this. Let me see if I could expand what I'm doing. So year two, I built out Homeschools Connected, which at the time was really just a way for me to create a community, a place where people could go and they join my community and they could see all of the resources I recommend, and they could communicate with me and other families who are going through a similar life experience. Hey, I'm homeschooling. I've been homeschooling for 2 years, 3 years, some people 10 years, right? Just a place where people can have community and find good resources.
Mm-hmm.
And that was people like that. And I was like, all right, year three, you know what? I'm going to go full bore at this. And that was last year, January 1st, I decided that I was going to really build out a full-fledged homeschooling company, a curriculum, everything. And starting January 1st of 2022, we begun. And I started teaching live classes, and I started building unit studies and lesson plans and courses and all types of educational resources. And in just, what is it now, 14 months? In 14 months, we have seen rapid growth to the point where we have over 700 paying members using our curriculum. We are focusing on education that matters, homeschool by homeschoolers, critical thinking, skill development, and getting children real world entrepreneurial experience. And within that, we have so much. We have curriculums completely based around gardening, where children are learning about photosynthesis and they're learning about soil biology, but they're doing it in the context of building a greenhouse, and they're doing it in the context of composting and making at-home fertilizer and planting seeds and growing plants and hammer and nail construction, building garden boxes, building outdoor greenhouses later in the year, which is really cool, and really developing these skills and then using the skills to get them entrepreneurial experience. So those students who are doing that unit study, they have an end of summer event where they take the crops that they grew and they actually use them to host an end of summer business event.
Mm.
There's other offshoot studies where you take your skills of building a garden box or building a ladybug feeder and you sell it on Etsy, or you market yourself to build garden boxes for the old ladies in the community, that type of thing. Really focusing on skill development. And we have a lot of this with the carpentry, with engineering type stuff, where we're really focusing on the development of skills and then using those skills to get the children entrepreneurial experience. Then on top of it, we're trying to make children into critical thinkers who trust their ability of observation, they trust their discernment, and they really understand the world. So when we study science, for example, in early childhood, we have our scientific observation series, which is all about the students getting out into nature and writing down their observations, recording their observations, analyzing how does water behave? How does water act? How do plants grow? What are the different parts of the plants? What happens when you dissect them and take them apart? All of these different things where they're really learning to trust their observation. Then we start doing the scientific method, where the students are not only doing the fun science experiments, but every experiment they do, they are setting up controls, they are setting up variables, they're identifying the independent and dependent variable, they are formulating their own hypothesis, they're making observations, they're analyzing the results. As we analyze the results, we're doing test, retest reliability, we're gauging the experiments for validity, right? Actually teaching children, yes, science, but to use their discernment and develop those critical thinking skills through the study of science. We're studying history, and sure, we're going over narratives. I'm the conductor of that, right? I'm conducting that train, but we're really teaching the students how you get back to those primary documents. They're tracking down that document on the North Atlantic slave trade themselves, right? Yeah, sure, I'll go over the document with them, and then the assignment is for them to find that document. And then after they find the document or don't, the next class, I'll walk through it step by step how I found the document, right? And we'll talk about the document. One of the really fun studies that we did was on the Illuminati, right? Is the Illuminati real? Is it fake? Well, don't ask me, ask history, right? And then make up your own mind, use your discernment. So what we wound up doing is a study looking for presidents talking about the Illuminati, right? Are there presidents of the United States that have talked about the Illuminati? Well, what we wound up finding, what our students wound up finding, is that in 98, we actually tracked down 2 letters written by George Washington in which he talked about the Illuminati and their attempts to infiltrate Freemasonic lodges in the United States of America.
Wow.
Right? So that's really interesting stuff. And then from there, we tell the students, we could show them the fun stuff, like all the celebrities covering their eyes and throwing up pyramids. And we could say, well, now there is some basis of truth in these claims about the Illuminati. Does that mean for a fact the Illuminati run the world? Of course not, right?
Mm-hmm. Or that they're nefarious, or that maybe they're doing good, maybe they're not, maybe they're there's still a lot more to discover there about what somebody might believe about it.
Exactly. But now they know, one, how to get back to documents and really start to discover what is true and not. And they know in their life, if they ever really want to do a deep dive into the Illuminati, even if they want to do it right after our class, right? They can start doing that. And they could determine for themselves, how true or false that information is. But we're learning how to separate what we know through primary documents from, what people say to what we think, right? And we can have opinions. Like I have an opinion about the Illuminati, right? But I'm smart enough to know that there's what I know, and then there's, what I think might be, but I have no idea. So And people, it's like, it's crazy that people can't just say that. So we're really teaching people, as I said before, what is your system of thinking, right? Are you just latching on to the next thing? Or do you really have an ability to use your discernment and say, I trust my own ability to analyze and break down this world? And yeah, I might be wrong, I might be right, but at least I have a ground to stand on. And that's what the majority of the public doesn't have.
They sure don't. They sure don't. And dude, this is such a breath of fresh air as a parent. But even back when I was a student, one of the most frustrating things that I experienced in school was the lack of context. People always told me what to study, but they never told me why. And I kept asking why. Like, why is this practical? Like, why do I need to know this? But why did certain things happen? And why did it lead to this, et cetera? And the skill sets that you're talking about teaching these children is answering their own why, putting together the puzzle so that they can figure it out for themselves and draw some context themselves, and obviously then utilize their own cognitive conclusions to paint a picture, to have a belief about something on their own independent path, and not have it be forced down their throat like somebody might say, trust the science, for example. So this is fascinating to me. The other thing that was really fascinating when you and I spoke a little while ago was that you have an entire curriculum, sadly, but also in a maybe exciting, opportunistic way, all on propaganda. This is obviously sort of what you're talking about right now, but is there anything that you could share on that note? Like, what do you teach the children about how to decipher what propaganda is versus actual truth?
Yeah, well, the beautiful thing is, through my teaching of history, the course I'm teaching right now on the logical fallacies, I have a great opportunity to really, yes, we study the things we're studying, but I also have an opportunity to talk to the children about the different things that are happening in the world and how propaganda functions. But to answer that question specifically, we offer a course that I put together using the Cubs to Bears children book series, which is the book series that I write. And that course is for elementary and middle school. And it's really foundations in propaganda. And what we do is we focus on the mechanisms and the levers that are often used to propagandize the public. So that might be a talk on how social shame is used against people, right? If you don't wear the mask, grandma's going to die. How fear is used, how people are labeled derogatory terms, and those terms are used to get you to turn off or turn away from them so you don't listen to what they're actually saying, right? Mm-hmm. These different mechanisms and levers of propaganda that are used to keep your mind in a box. And once people know how to see that, they can see it forever. One of my favorite things is how we look into the way music is used to alter your perception of things. And the example I like to use is a Sarah McLachlan commercial, where, she's there with the sad looking dog and in the arms of the angel, yeah. Right? And you could sit down and watch that commercial and it's, how is this designed to make you feel? And what was the goal of making you feel that way? What were they trying to extract out of you, right? And you're just going over the different ways in which people are manipulated, people are propagated so that they can see it. And the beautiful thing is, once you see it, once you understand propaganda, it's very easy. Like, my wife kind of laughs, if she ever puts on a show, she watches the show, but all I do is analyze the propaganda. And, once you see it, it's just very easy to see. And the propaganda becomes more interesting than the stuff you're watching. It's like, oh, wow, what is the goal behind this? What are they trying to accomplish here? Right. And it's, it's like the emperor has no clothing, where they're putting out their propaganda and I'm just there. I'm like, I can see right through you. I can see what you're doing. Yeah. And a society, if enough people have that ability, that's a big problem for the powers that be.
100%, dude. I am the exact same way to my kids' detriment, where we're watching the same thing, but I'm seeing something completely different, and I'm pointing out this, that, or whatever, and they're just like, "Oh God, Dad," they're a little bit annoyed and frustrated, but at the same time, they also are receiving it. And we've had some very interesting conversations, like the one I had last night with my son, where we were talking about frame control, and he's like, "What do you mean by that, Dad?" And I'm like, "Well, as a parent, if you tell a toddler, do you want to put on your shoes or do you want me to put on your shoes? You're giving the toddler the illusion of choice. And from the toddler's perspective, they're empowered to make a decision. But because I'm the parent and I've set the frame, I don't care which one you choose. At the end of the day, you're putting your shoes on. So I'm controlling the entire behavior and the entire structure. This is something I tried to bring up with some of the administrators at my kids' school, where they thought that they were offering critical thinking by letting the children choose between defunding the police or being pro-police. I'm like, do you not see that the entire frame is not even being questioned? And they did not, and they had no idea how Marxism was being infiltrated into the school system. And frankly, a lot of them, when I ask them about it, I just get blank stares, and they have no idea. They truly and genuinely think that they are not. Several of them have said to me, look, I am not political. I'm truly just teaching from my heart. And I believe that they believe that. And I know that in their heart, they're not being, malicious or had some political ends. I do trust that. But what they lack to understand is that the entire frame is political, regardless of your intention. The frame itself, like you said, the captain of the ship has already been handed to you. The standards are already set. Nobody's asking the questions, well, where the heck did those standards come from? And what happens if I disagree, or if I have a different opinion, or if I want to deviate? And here I am at a private Christian school, and these kids are still getting the more or less same education that they'd go if they went to a federally funded public school. It's wild. I have a question for you as we're starting to wind up on time here. For those that are listening, what is the end product that you're looking to create? What's the vision of the student that you're trying to produce with this online school system that you have?
Yeah, well, I say if we don't produce an 18-year-old that is capable of living as a free and independent person in the world, not you have to go to college. I mean, if you want to, great, but not that framework where, all right, you graduated high school, now you go to college, you could discover who you are, and after $100,000 in debt in 4 years, you could, maybe start making money. No, if an 18-year-old is not capable of living a free and independent life at age 18, then I failed them. Like, in my opinion, if I were to give someone my child from the age of 3 to 18, and the best they could promise me is they'll be able to take out a college loan, why would I send my child to you? Mm-hmm. I mean, we have so long to educate young people. By the time they're 18, they should be capable of living that free and independent life. And that comes down to a few different things, where they have to be critical thinkers, as we talked about here. They have to trust their power of discernment. They have to have confidence in themselves. They need to have skills. Getting back to primary documents is a skill. The scientific method is a skill. Critical thinking is a skill. Reading, writing, carpentry, engineering, skills, anything.
Entrepreneurship. I love that you're folding entrepreneurship into all the stuff that you're doing.
Right. Well, that's what it is, because then what you do is you take those skills and then you use that to guide the children into getting them entrepreneurial experience, right? If you give me, I like to use carpentry as an example, because if I have a child that could make a bird feeder, then I could guide them to sell bird feeders, right? They have an actual skill. And then you get them entrepreneurial experience, and you start to develop their skills in that arena, right? And then with that, you want to teach financial literacy. Of course, you want to teach them all the good things, like the ability to identify the manipulation. But really what we're talking about is giving them the skills, the knowledge, and the experience to live a free and independent life when they are old enough to live a free and independent life. And that's what the school system should be doing. And if that's what we're doing, I wouldn't be necessary, but it's not. Mm-hmm. So we're going to build it out, and we are producing very capable young people who are going to do very good things in this world.
Amazing, dude. I freaking love it. And you're 100% right. The school system today is producing dependent cogs to the machine. First and foremost, the traditional schooling system, in my humble opinion, is producing that. And then secondarily, now with all the wokeism and all of the Marxist, neo-Marxist stuff that has infiltrated the school system, very subtly, very devastatingly, very destructively, and frankly, very coyly and very subtly, but it is there in a massive way. It's very destructive ideology. I've said that these ideas really, if a free and independent nation has clear critical thinkers who are able to generate ideas and then express those ideas and articulate those ideas freely and have contention and have debate and have, wrestle through these ideas. When you start to clump together groups and that they're only allowed to think in one way, you're literally creating a clotting of those ideas in the country. And what happens to a body that gets clotted? It shuts down. And that's what we're seeing in our nation right now is ideas. When you see comedians that are not allowed on school campuses anymore, when you see people losing their jobs, when you see professors being, sent out of the educational institutions, that's the clotting of ideas in a country, and it's not good. So, dude, what you're doing is so admirable. And I have to ask you before we wrap this up, because I know this is a question a lot of parents want to ask outside of, can I sign up too? Since your program is all online, can you meet the two primary questions that parents are probably going to have when it comes to homeschooling online? Number one, is my child going to be sitting behind a computer all day? And number two, what about the social skills?
Yeah, so my philosophy is that education should be hands-on as possible. So yeah, absolutely not. Your children should, and if you go the direction of, using my stuff, no, they'll be doing a lot of hands-on work. Like I said, the nature unit study, carpentry, where they're physically building things with their hands, a lot of STEM projects, science through the scientific method, where you're using things in the house to do science experiments. So education should be very hands-on. And yeah, of course, we have classes too, where, for example, one of the things I'm most passionate about is teaching the history classes. And yeah, for those, they'll sit in front of the computer. But then right after that, they're getting back to the primary documents. They're reading it themselves. Two of the books that we've been reading through the Founding Fathers series, the autobiography of Ben Franklin, Rules for Civility and Decency by George Washington, right? These are primary writings of great historical figures. So yeah, education should absolutely be hands-on as possible. And in terms of socialization, as a homeschooler, it's really a badge of honor. And you should be treating it like you treat science and history and all that good stuff. It's a priority. So your child should be going to the park multiple times a week. They should be having meetups with other kids multiple times a week. They should be on sporting teams. For example, right after I get off the phone with you, my son and I will be going to karate, where he interacts with a bunch of people. He's on a baseball team. We have a Sunday class at the local church he participates in. He's in a gymnastics class on Fridays. He's 5. So, you make sure that you get your children into the world as much as possible, and then it's not an issue. Yeah, I mean, most homeschoolers you speak to they don't have their children home all day. That's a complete misconception.
Yeah, agreed. And with this curriculum, are students able to get state requirements credited?
Yeah, so the way that works is with homeschooling, every state's different, right? All 50 states are different, but the majority of states just require a certain number of course hours and potentially some mandated courses, although most of them don't, as well as the standardized testing, which is done through the state. So if you need to know the regulations in the state that you live, you go to hslda.org and you click on, they have a state map of the United States. You click on the state that you live and the regulations pop right up. And from there, you'll see, okay, there's no requirements on most things. Usually it's just, you have to do a certain number of course hours, and parents can actually determine what constitutes those course hours. Like I said, all the parents use it, and it's perfectly fine to use, and it counts as your course hours. There are some programs that are accredited. Time for Learning and Abeka are two that come to mind, but the majority of homeschool programs aren't accredited. And the reason for that is the whole purpose of homeschooling is you don't want state regulators approving your curriculum.
Right.
So yeah, some people want to go that route, but the majority of homeschoolers don't. And I believe 85% of colleges accept students who use programs that are not accredited, including Ivy League like Harvard, Princeton.
I mean, especially when you're creating a body of work, when these students are coming to them having, already entrepreneurial skills, running businesses, building things, creating things. I mean, that is very appealing to a university that is going to want to educate that child and then show them up as an example of how great their education is. They've already got a student who's already doing cool stuff. So when we first spoke, in my head, I was thinking like, man, it's probably hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to attend your program. Tell folks how much it costs.
Oh no, I'm trying to take my country back. It's $15 a month, but if you use the discount code FREEDOM, all lowercase and no spaces, it is $10 a month. People use our curriculum in a variety of different ways. Some people use just our curriculum for everything but math, because I don't have the math built out yet. So some people use just our curriculum. Some people use our curriculum in conjunction with other curriculums. And other people actually use our curriculum as their children go to public school, which is really interesting because they want their children learning the very unique things that we are offering. So there's no one right way to do it, but it's very affordable and it's very flexible. And like I said, my goal is to not only make a better education system, but my goal is to bring it to everyone so that in 20 years, we have a country of so many people that have this unique education where they are critical thinkers and they are rugged individualists, rooted in community, of course, like America was founding on. These people who are craftsmen and tradesmen who are capable of living free and independent lives. And you take enough people like that, and we'll be in a much better place in 20 years.
Silly question, but do you allow adults to take it? Because I know a lot of people listening to this are going, shoot, I'd like to do this myself, including myself.
Yeah, we actually do have adults that use our resources. It's funny, I get that question probably every day. So right. Yes, we do have adults using our curriculum as well.
I know you're not doing it for this, but you're going to be a multi-millionaire with this, because I just know that the only thing that's keeping you from that is just awareness. Once people hear you and what you're doing and the type of education that you're offering, I think that people are absolutely yearning for this. I know there's many, many parents that I know that are looking for something like this. So I more than applaud what you're doing. If there's anything else I can do beyond, sharing this episode, et cetera, that can support what you're doing, I'm all on board, man, because I agree. I think it is a matter of the nation's future is on the line. And this to me is a brilliant, positive dent in the right direction. So I applaud what you're doing, man. Thank you so much for your time today and sharing. Of course, for those that are interested, where should they go to sign up or get more information?
Yeah, you can go to www.classicallearner.com and you will see Homeschools Connected. And the beautiful thing about what we're doing is last year, it was just me building out a year's worth of curriculum, and you'd be amazed by how much we built out in 1 year. And now in year 2 of doing this, now I've actually started bringing in people who are teachers other than me, people building curriculum other than me. So we're really starting to expedite that process. And anyone who got in already or gets in now, I will never raise the price on an existing member. So if you get in now at $10 a month, as we continue to expand and I'm able to reinvest into more teachers and more curriculum builders, the price doesn't go up for you. So you're getting all of that, new teachers coming in, new curriculum coming in, and you'll be locked in at that price for as long as you want to stay. And if that's, that's kind of my way of building, and that's my way of rewarding the people that have been with me from the start here. Like I said, 1 year, and we are 700 members strong. And those members who are in at the price they're in, I'll never raise the price on them as long as they want to stay with us.
I spoke to you a few weeks ago, and you were at 600, I think. So good for you, man. This is awesome. This is brilliant. It's classicallearner.com.
Classicallearner.com.
Brett, thank you so much, man. Really love what you're up to, and I know a lot of people are going to be excited about this. It's brilliant.
All right, Peter, thanks for having me. Really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, brother. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wired for Impact. If you're interested in creating and expanding your impact, be sure to visit us online at impactnow.com.